Do you want to record a quick disclaimer, like for the very front end here? Like, hi, Mary here. We cover some intense topics. We just want to let you know, blah, blah, blah.
I was thinking that might be a Steve thing.
Either way.
Well, I mean, you're the one that's going to get sued.
Oh my gosh.
That's
I'm
B-roll.
just a 1099 contractor, so, you know.
Oh my God.
I just work here. Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast, where we believe that negative emotions should not run your life. Join Mary Carlton and Steve Freitag as they share the keys they've learned from over 20 years of helping people find genuine freedom and live a more meaningful life through the truth, love, and healing of Jesus. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Cross Counsel Podcast. I, of course, am your host, John Crevillian, and I'm joined with my lovely co-host, Stephen Freitag. Stephen? Ooh, that felt weird.
Yes, mother.
Redoing that one. It's me, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast. I, of course, am John Crevillian, your friendly neighborhood host, and I'm joined with my co-hosts, Steve Freitag. How are you, Steve?
Hello, John. I'm doing fine.
Excellent. That was very real and natural.
That's right. We're playing B-roll.
And, of course, and B-roll. There you go. And, of course, Mary Carlton joins us as well. How are you, Mary?
I am good. I'm a little bit stressed because of all the events from Wes killing a deer last night. But
my.
Yeah, it's a lot more work than I imagined. I didn't think that through. Never been involved in that kind of a situation. And, but I will say that Wes is a professional, so he's very good. He knows exactly what to do. He's, very humane person. And yeah, it was great, but just went on into the night and then started up again early this morning. So, it kind of worked. No, not going to say that. Anyway, so.
Okay.
It's not shocking to me that Wes knows how to field dress a deer because he's a cowboy.
But the thing is, I did not sign up for that. Okay. So, we called his neighbor. We called our neighbor down the road to come help because, I'm not doing that.
So like 5 a.m. he's like, hey, Mary, help me dress this deer. And you're like, listen, Texas Red, that's your job. All right. I'll raise the chickens. You deal with this.
Exactly. I didn't even want to see it, honestly. So
if anybody sees that
if
anybody sees that I'm distracted right now on another computer, I'm looking up your wedding vows because I helped out in the wedding.
And I will. Hey, you were there. You should remember.
There's between the lines as well. Okay, I'll stop looking.
No, his friend came over. It was great. Our neighbor actually came over. Our neighborhood is great. Everybody pulls together, when people are in crisis. We all help each other. So that was really neat.
Sure. There you go. Right on. Anything new happening in your world, Steve?
Boy, just getting over Thanksgiving. I guess by the time this drops, it's been a couple weeks, but I really felt this burden to share something with y'all. No one even knows this unless they were really paying attention to me, but I went all Thanksgiving Day without having any turkey.
Oh my.
Wow. The look on your face, John. Yeah.
What was the reason?
Well, there was this shrimp dish that I'm like, I love shrimp. I love seafood. And I also had in the back of my mind that a good friend of ours who's in our small group was going to be, bringing turkey. I think he'd said that before Thanksgiving. I might be just imagining that, but I knew that he was going to smoke a turkey, and I knew that would be awesome. I mean, the family food that we have, especially Jenny's side, is amazing all the time. But then my buddy Mike also said he was going to make his dad's stuffing. He's like, when you think of stuffing, what do you think? And it's like over 65% is meat and sausage and all this stuff. And it was like, the turkey was great. I could have that sausage, like that stuffing, quote unquote stuffing, every day. So it was amazing.
Nice,
He
nice.
walked away with an empty pan, that's for sure. So anyway, yeah, thanks.
That's awesome.
Thanksgiving was good. Looking forward to the holidays, all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with today's subject. But first, we're going to get a quick word from Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny. The holidays are here. We know that people can struggle at the holidays as well as be filled with amazing joy and love on their family. But we at Cross Counsel want to be here as a resource for those people looking to find healing for the things that they bump into this time of year. Those trigger points, those relationships that are a struggle. Some of those people come to us with a financial need, and they can't pay for their ministry sessions. In this season of giving, would you consider donating to cover somebody's session cost? Either become a monthly donor and join that part of our team that blesses more than one person on a regular and monthly basis, or if you just want to give a single gift, someone will be grateful, someone will be blessed, because God is doing beautiful and amazing things in the hearts of His children. He wants us to live and to walk in freedom. Would you be a help to somebody who is looking for that this holiday season and beyond? Give today at crosscounsel.com.
Alrighty, guys. Let's go ahead and get started. The subject for today is an interesting one. I think very relevant for today. I feel like most of our subjects are. We're going to be talking a little bit about verbal abuse. We're going to talk a little bit about, going through that experience, the scars it leaves behind, how to get healed, that sort of thing, just as a starting point here. So, and that's a pretty heavy topic, and that leaves some pretty heavy damage. So I guess, what do you guys want to say before we get, as we get started here on this?
Well, we do deal with, a lot of that in people coming for ministry, but we just want to make it clear that we're not licensed counselors. Okay. So there's people that can help you with, or help you understand what's happening, help you to deal with in current relationships, how to manage those better. But we're really going to talk about what can you do to move yourself through that kind of situation. And so we're going to talk about our experience, right, in helping people to get to a place of peace in those situations.
Okay.
Well said.
So I guess just as a starting point,
you want to go, did you want to say something, Steve?
No, that's good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just as a starting point, I always like to start with definitions. So, verbal abuse, how are we defining it? What are our thoughts on kind of the range of hurtful to dangerous, that sort of thing?
So, I mean, it's interesting. Everybody has different definitions for what verbal abuse is, but it can be simple, not simple, still painful, but simple things like people who get angry and yell at the people around them, even if they're mad at themselves. A child growing up in that environment where someone's yelling or angry all the time, that's hurtful for them, even if it's not directed toward them. But when people blame others for their own faults or failures or things that clearly were not the fault of the person they're blaming, those are more easy to recognize things, I guess. Controlling behavior. It can get more serious, where it can develop into stalking, people being jealous, overly jealous in a relationship, which I actually ministered to someone not that long ago that had a boyfriend that was happening. Calling names and gaslighting. We can talk about what that is. So there can be some very serious things involved in verbal abuse, but for a lot of us, it's more common, everyday, ordinary things that we may not even recognize are verbal abuse.
Yeah, and so much of it has to do with how things are interpreted as well. Not somebody really close to me, but they had a son, and then they had another son, and the way they referred to the second one was brother. That's what they called them, brother. That just seemed a little bit odd to me, and I don't know enough about the situation, but it was just, well, tell brother. Well, hey, brother. They would directly call the second boy brother.
Ooh.
You know, and I think they thought it was sweet, and I don't know how that was years ago, but it just kind of hit me a bit odd that you would call a child by that kind of a title. If you ask me today, I don't know what that kid's name was. So
Interesting.
So how was that interpreted? And maybe it was fine.
Right.
Maybe there's no big deal. And maybe, maybe my concern was unwarranted, but just even little things like that. I think.
Right. And interpreting is really important, Steve. That's a great point, because not everyone sees verbal abuse the same way. There's people on the one end that are being verbally abused but don't even recognize it, right? Because they're so used to growing up with that. They're so used to people treating them that way. They don't even recognize that they're being blamed for stuff that isn't their fault or whatever. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where people call everything that's happening to them verbal abuse, right? So if they're being criticized or faults are being pointed out, or spouse, for example, trying to help their wife or husband understand, that thing that happens, the way you react, it's not healthy. Someone could call that verbal abuse, right? Because of the wounding that they have in their perception that other person is attacking me. So it's really the person's perspective is what makes it important, right? Is this hurtful to me, or have I not even noticed that I'm being disrespected?
And one of the easiest and in the short term effective ways to parent children is to shame and belittle them. It's a shortcut. I mean, it's ultimately really damaging, but it's so harmful when shame is a driver. And just even with teasing, sometimes there's this underlying thing that really is about trying to make that child feel bad so they would behave better.
Yeah.
I don't want you to get a big head, so I'm gonna knock you down by saying this or calling you this, so that you don't think that you're too significant or too important, or that you're God's gift to mankind. I get that, but just putting kids down all the time, it just leads to them then probably treating others with disrespect. Like that cycle just continues, and,
right.
and probably not real great at being, maybe I was going to say not becoming empathetic. It could be, depending on how it affects them, makes them very empathetic, because I think I became empathetic with the names I was called at school or on the bus. But then I could also see the hardness that could happen in somebody's heart. And then because they don't know what to do with that shame or that belittlement or that name calling, that, well, then forget the rest of the world. I'm just going to treat them the way I've been treated, as a way to manage my pain.
Yeah. And anger starts, of course, in kids when things don't make sense and their needs aren't being met because their parent is abusive or verbally abusive, putting them down, shaming, blaming, whatever they're doing. So then the kid gets anger, and then they have a hard time feeling because they've pressed all that down and covered it up with anger, which makes them feel strong, right? Makes them feel like they're protected. And so we do see that a lot when we minister to people, that anger is just woven all the way through because of the things that have happened and the way they've tried to cope with the situations that they had growing up.
Right.
But we see that in adults too. Adults who are in relationships, well, you talked about what happens to the kids, Steve. So we do minister to children. If parents, there's a whole scenario that we involve parents in when we minister to children. But most of the time we're ministering to adults, but we end up in childhood memories where those kind of things happened. So, and what's interesting to me is that many times the adult is suffering the same things that that kid suffered. The verbal abuse, right? Because they tend to gravitate toward relationships that they're comfortable with, right? That they want. They're comfortable with someone treating them a certain way, and so then it just perpetuates those things that happened as a kid, perpetuate into their adult life.
But even things like, why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like your sister? Yeah. Those kind of things. Just
yeah.
That really is verbal abuse. It's that, again, a shortcut. Instead of trying to understand what's going on inside of the child, it's a shortcut way of venting your frustration, because what can even be driving that from a parent standpoint, it doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. It could be the way that you're acting makes me feel like a failure, but I'm not going to recognize that. And so I'm going to project my pain of I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, onto you, because then if you perform better, then I don't have to feel like this failure. So why don't you this? Well, maybe in some sense it is for the child, but quite often it's for the parents themselves.
Yeah. And actually I can relate to that, because I remember as a parent getting angry a lot when my kids were little. And when I actually started taking a look at, why is this happening? Like, I get angry and then it's more than it should be, right, for what the offense was. And I started realizing exactly what you said, Steve, that I realized I was feeling like a failure. I was becoming too much like my mom. God rest her soul. She's a wonderful woman, but yelled a lot when we were kids. And so I caught myself acting that same way to cover up the feelings of failure and inadequacy, and the fear that my kids are going to be, they're going to go the wrong direction. All the stuff a lot of parents can relate to, just the fears about your kids. And so you either put that on them or you get angry at yourself because you feel like you're not measuring up. And so kids suffer with anger a lot of times in parents that are actually covering up for their own inadequacies. So I'm so grateful, honestly, that I started getting ministry when the kids were 3 and 5, so that stuff started getting peeled off. And it was great because my kids, I shared my journey with them, actually, about what was happening. Remember when you guys did this? I got so mad, but it really wasn't your fault, because what I did was I asked God, and then I described for them what happened. And he showed me how when I was a little girl and this happened. So they started realizing this isn't about us, right? So it took off of them the stuff they might have absorbed about their own worth, because I was willing to own that it was me. It was actually me. It was my responses that were wrong in that situation. And I think that went a long way toward creating a healthy environment for them. And it's bad to say, I don't know if this is good or not, but they would actually start giggling sometimes when I'd get really mad, because they knew, this is just mom having another one of her moments. They'd start laughing, they tell stories about some of the things that I did. Even today, it's been 25 years. They're still telling stories. But I think when parents recognize that that's what's happening, share it with your kids. It's one thing to apologize and say, daddy was too harsh right there, whatever. But then to be willing to own why you were that way, why that happened, and to share with them, there's something going on inside of me that it's not your fault, that I really need God to help me with. What a great way to lead as a parent.
I'm just sorry, I'm laughing because I'm just picturing the girls saying one to another, Mommy needs some ministry.
They do. And they did. Oh my gosh. I'll share one of the famous ones is I was, they were probably about 5 and 6, something like that. And how as a parent, you'll say things to your kids and they ignore you, right? Over and over, they ignore me. And I got it just like that thing stirred up in me, like my kids are disrespectful, my kids are dishonoring, the Bible says, all that stuff like would get on me about how awful my kids are going to turn out because what a bad parent I am. And so I remember going in there and grabbing my ears and going, what are these for? Like in my anger, it was just so like felt justified in the moment. My kids, that's one of them they bring up today. They'll like grab their ears. Mom, what are these for? But in the moment, it was not fun because I was really triggered, by all my lack of ability to parent.
Mary, you're setting yourself up for like a slow motion meme with John going, with like that deep voice. What are these for?
Oh my gosh. I would definitely
as
make
funny
sure
as
my
that would
kids
be,
watched
I like
it.
to continue to get paid.
That's right.
I just set up my desk here. I don't need to clean it out.
there is a hierarchy, right? As much as we
there
hate
is a hierarchy.
in
True.
some way. Yes.
No,
Oh
my
gosh.
kids would think that was hilarious.
Just for them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's funny.
Hey, here you go. Merry Christmas.
Unshareable, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, even things like, I don't know how many memories I've gone into where somebody says something like, my mom and or my dad said, what are you crying about? I'll give you something to cry about. And then my generation, and what's so interesting is those kind of things get shared in public or, in family. And you know what people do when they share those stories? Mary,
yeah,
you
they
probably
think
guess.
It's funny.
They laugh about it. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you remember that? Oh yeah, I'll give you something to cry about. But when people slow down and actually, that is part of the difference between how people said, well, I've dealt with that, ha ha ha, I've dealt with it and I've talked about it and I've looked at it, but it's still, there's that huge chasm in between talking about it, maybe even describing it, and actually in our terms, like reliving it in a memory. And I just had somebody last night, it wasn't a memory related to that phrase, but they laughed and it was a crazy situation. And I said, was there anything funny about that? And it was just stop them in their tracks. And then later, like in the debrief, mentioned that. I'm really glad that you said that. So in that, I'll give you something to cry about, to slow that down. And how did that feel? Because I'll give you something to cry about. It is out of the parent's pain and a loss of knowing what else to do. Again, doesn't excuse it, but then how that's interpreted, it can be interpreted many different ways.
Yeah.
But to be able to slow down and just the invalidation emotion is huge there, or the fear or the shame, all a part of that. And so what did you believe from that? How did you interpret that? I'll give you something to cry about. And how many times does it come down to, I'm little, I don't matter, I'm insignificant, I'm worthless, whatever that is. And so the more that we are able to get freedom from Jesus, we can still hear those words of a parent or an adult. I'll give you something to cry about. And then when it's resolved and there's no more pain, even when you go looking for it, then maybe you can be a little bit more lighthearted, but don't use that lightheartedness as a way to cover up the pain.
Yeah, that's so good. And as an adult, looking back, all of us as parents were thinking about all this stuff that we did to our kids, right? People listening we're not trying to put guilt on people, but
no,
it's never too late to take a look at all of that, right? It's never too late, even if your parents are grown. I mean, your kids are grown, to take a look at that, the way I parented, get some freedom on all that for your own self. I remember when my dad was, before he died, he was 89 when he died. And so he was probably in his 80s when we talked about this. And he said, I really feel bad about the way I treated the boys. Like his whole life, he's carried that. So getting free from that isn't just so that you can have a better relationship with your kids. It's to get rid of all the guilt, right? Parents relate to the guilt. I think just about any parent, over guilt, regrets, things that we did that we wish we'd have done differently now that we're, down the road a ways. but God can release us of that guilt, right? And that actually was a lot of the stuff that I dealt with initially when I started getting ministry around my kids. Whenever kids situations would come up, would be the guilt and the shame over things that I had done and the way I treated them. And so that's really important. But then also to get peace and truth, like Steve talked about, for the things that happened to you as a child, the way your parents parented, you're going to probably parent that same way, right? Until you get those beliefs out of there, you're going to act the same way, or you might go the opposite, which a lot of us have done too, being too lenient because we had a parent or parents that were too strong. So, God's interested in redemption in all of it, in every part of our life, in every stage in our life. So there is freedom on all of these things he has available for us.
Absolutely. And like, this is kind of interesting that we're talking about this today, because the other day, me and my girlfriend, we were watching a movie that was made in like the 1940s or something, and it was depicting the 1920s through the 30s, and there was a lot of interesting moments that are so like completely foreign to us, like little kids working in soda bars, or like out doing manual labor, that sort of thing. And like little kids, like like 10-year-olds walking around with like overalls, pickaxe, that sort of thing. And there was this scene where like this kid like messed something up, and it wasn't even like his parent, but it was like his store manager was yelling at him like, "What's the matter with you?" and like clapping him on the side of the face. And me and Amari are watching it like, oh my gosh, this happened back then, like that's wild. And talking about kind of abuse now, and like verbally, there was also not just physical abuse, there was verbal abuse that was happening too. And just looking at that and thinking, what does that do to someone? Like how does that abuse carry into their life when it happens to them at such a young age, that sort of thing. So it's really interesting that we're talking about it today. And I really like what you said, Mary, about how, like you had gone through a lot of things in your childhood, and then you very much like through the melt process, through looking at perceived lies or lies that we believed, and replacing it with truth, replacing it with healing, you were able to like address that cycle to your children and say like, listen, this is what I went through. This isn't a reflection on you. This is something I'm dealing with, and I don't want this anymore. And through Jesus, that healing is coming, and this cycle is being stopped. I admire that so much. That's so great.
Well, at some point you don't like living with the guilt and the shame and the fear and the anger and all that, right? So I just encourage people, if you're feeling all that, let God help you with that. Honestly, that's what most of the time spurs us on to get healing, is because the negative emotions, we don't like them. We want to be rid of them. It probably wasn't an altruistic kind of a motivation initially. But yeah, the fruit of it has been super good.
Yeah. And I guess it's really interesting too, that you, eventually went back and you like talked with your dad about that time and about like going through that whole situation you had growing up. Cause I would think like, and I feel like a lot of times people think, hey, should I distance myself from this relationship?
Yeah.
Should I just cut contact, burn the bridge, that sort of thing? And what do you guys think of that?
Well, do you ever counsel people on that, Steve, or what's your take when you minister to people who are in, difficult relationships?
I think the biggest thing is to deal with the triggers and what's going on inside of you. And then that's where wisdom then takes place. I think when we get some of the blinders off our eyes and our eyes are more enlightened, then we know when to set up healthy boundaries, and we know okay, this isn't good for me, or I'm in process right now. The season in my life right now would be to avoid this person, but don't make that season the next 20 years.
Right.
But right now, as I am healing from that, it might not be good for me, but it should never be an excuse. And I think it's always this posture of standing before the Lord and say, Lord, what should I do here? And it's not like we always get an answer, but there can be a leading one way or another. Or sometimes I think the Lord is like, that's up to you. I think there's a variation. I don't want to become legalistic with even how God speaks to us, but I think the more that we get healing and freedom and our minds are renewed and our hearts become more transformed, we will have a better understanding, because there's no way to test how far we've come unless we're exposed to those things that used to trigger us. And there can be, like we've said many times, in the moment, okay, Lord, I'm going to show up at this event, this gathering, whatever it is. And Lord, help me to be very aware of when I'm getting triggered, and not then to have that response of, well, it's that person's fault. Well, maybe it is that person's fault for some of the things they say and some of the ways that they treat you or other people, but it doesn't necessarily the arrow doesn't have to go that deep in your heart. And so one of the things I've said even more recently is, okay, that when that person would do that, wow, that arrow that was shot went 6 inches into your heart. Okay, well, there's that same arrow. Did it go 4 inches into your heart now? Okay, that's better. Or 2 inches into your heart, or maybe it bounced off. So does that help answer the question?
Yeah, that's good. I think it's important to talk about what we've talked about with kids, right? How verbal abuse in all the different forms and fashions, how it can affect a child, affect their identity, their worldview about their value, even their beliefs about God. But as an adult, I think it's really important to look at what's still in us that causes us to be drawn to people that are not healthy for us. And I have a lot of experience with that. Just, and a lot of times in a marriage relationship is where these kind of issues will surface, because it's not as easy to just say, well, I'm not ever calling them back, if it's a friend. But when you're married to someone and you've made a life commitment, those things, you basically are trapped in a place where God can deal with your heart. And so it was really great for me when I first started recognizing when I was married, and there was a lot of verbal abuse, and probably both ways, actually, if I was to own my part of it. When I started realizing, and actually that my friends at church helped me, I would say, well, this happened and this happened. And they'd say, honey, that is not healthy for you. That is not those things that are being done. You need to take care of yourself there. And this isn't right, what's happening. And they were wonderful people. They really were awesome. And they helped me to see what I couldn't see, because I'd grown up with a certain level of, that, right? And so I didn't even recognize that some of the things that were being done to me were not right. And so it really helped me that they came alongside and showed me, because then I could go, okay, well, you're right. This isn't fair. All I did was forget to buy bananas, right? And so now I'm being retaliated against. This is like not right. And that actually happened. So it was, what I'm trying to say is that even though things in our current life are sometimes out of whack, it does trigger things inside of us that we need to look at. And the way I was able to get peace with my kids and peace in that whole situation, in that relationship, was to let God heal the wounds and speak truth into my heart. The things that, it took away those places, like you talked about, Steve, where the enemy's arrows were able to get through. It took those away, and not 100%, because it takes a lifetime to really incorporate God's truth into us. But boy, it brought so much peace where the same things would happen in the relationship, what people could call abusive, and it didn't affect me. In fact, I felt compassion. I felt compassion for him because I saw the little boy hurt stuff that was happening there and the lashing out at me that had nothing to do with me. And that's the place God wants us to all get, right? And to be able to have God's heart of love for people, even when they're abusive, because then when you get to that place, then you can actually make choices about your life. Like one woman that I ministered to had a mother that was, their whole relationship was not good. And her mother was what I would say emotionally abusive, verbally abusive to her. And so she coped in all these unhealthy ways. And she started getting ministry. And I remember the time that she came to me after some holiday, I think it was Easter, where she had gone home because all the kids come home at Easter, and she'd been around her mom. And she said, it was so amazing. I walked in the kitchen and my mom made some snide remark about how I can't manage the microwave. Like, you're too stupid to figure out, the same kind of stuff that would happen. And she said, I felt no anger toward her. I felt no degrading feelings. I just looked at her and I felt so much compassion for this poor person that is in so much pain that they can't be happy, even when their family's all around. And it was so great. She said that was just awesome to not have a response like that, to not have that knee-jerk pain come up because of the way that her mom acted. So I love that because that's our goal, right? That's our goal, that people live in peace and that they're able to love those around them, even when there is verbal abuse happening. You can't take action if you yourself are in the midst of your pain, right? And if you do take action, it's not going to be a healthy reaction, right? It probably won't be. So
exactly.
Boy, there's so much more that we could cover on this subject. My mind is just going so many different directions, even though we're actually following somewhat of an outline, but there's so much more that comes with this and trying to live this thing out. And I think as followers of Jesus, to live in these kingdom understandings and even the idea of speaking truth in love. Like, you could say things to a mom who treats somebody like that, and you could have this snarkiness that's driven by anger. But when people actually step into the melt process and they find freedom and healing, then they can actually, when it's appropriate, know if they should say something. And it's that transformation that only the Lord can give. And he's been doing it before the melt process was ever invented, but it is just this systematic way to attack those things in our faith that are not in alignment with his heart. And so that's why we love doing this ministry. It's non-exhaustive. Not only are we never going to be out of work, I've never been tired talking about this stuff.
right.
Yeah. Amen, man. Amen. This has been the Cross Counsel Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, share with your friends, and look for us on social media. The world will become a much better place, and Jesus will be seen in a much better light the more we are transformed by his truth and love. We'll see you next time, everybody.